I can't quite remember how it happened, but it ended up leading to a massive fight between the section next door and ours. I wasn't on this shift. I was going to be on the one the next morning. They broke the gate down. They started just having a fight. Knives got pulled. A 14-year-old boy is killed about 2 meters outside of our office. And one of the boys who we were taking care of did it.
Hi guys, Matt here. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Raw Mission, the podcast where we bring you challenging and inspiring stories of ordinary folks sharing the good news of our extraordinary God in some of the toughest parts of the world. Now, do you ever think that missionaries are super spiritual, somehow on a different level to other followers of Jesus? Well, one of the aims of this podcast is to break that myth. Those who go are no different to those who stay. We're flawed, we're sinful, and we do things we're not proud of. In fact, many of us see ourselves more like Jonah than the Apostle Paul. From time to time, I like to invite guests onto the show who aren't from frontiers. After all, there are so many wonderful mission agencies out there who share our passion for the lost, for Muslims and for gospel-deprived peoples. We want to learn from them, and we want to hear some of their stories. And today I have one such guest on the show who's a student at London School of Theology and spent much of 2020 working with refugees on the Greek Island of Lesbos. The infamous Moria camp is where he was based, a huge camp which has been variously described as a concentration camp, an open prison, and even the worst refugee camp on earth. Ben gives us some great insights into life there and how he managed to deal with the various episodes of violence and danger, both inside and outside the camps. So welcome, Ben. Good to have you with us today in the studio.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for bringing me on.
Tell us a bit about where you grew up, because I know it's not the usual story.
Okay, so I was born into I guess what you would call missionary family. My parents had met in the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. I grew up there with my older sister for about 1 year. We left just before my first birthday and moved to Bamako in Mali.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just in case, I mean, some of our listeners won't know much about the geography of Africa. So where are we talking? Where's that?
So Mauritania is under Morocco on the west coast of Africa. Mm-hmm. And then Mali is, you go east.
Okay, so that one's inland.
That one's inland. Yep. So most of the country is in the Sahara. We were in the part of the country which was livable with farmland and bigger cities. We were there for about 4 years.
Okay, so do you have any personal memories of that time?
I have very positive memories of Mali, especially mangoes. I used to sit under this mango tree and just wait for stuff to drop.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I loved I was a pretty bored kid because, Mali was at least a decade behind tech compared to the UK. So at this point, no internet.
Yeah.
Nothing really electronic was really out. There were books in this big trunk, but if I didn't want to read, I would just have to go into the back garden. There was that. There was French nursery, which I was very bad at school. I got essentially kicked out of that.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I was homeschooled by my mum for ages. Then my dad got a job with Samaritan's Purse working in Sudan. So we moved there when I was about, I want to say 6. Yeah.
So from all the way in West Africa, through the middle and right across to East Africa.
Yeah. It was interesting because we went from 2 francophone countries to now an anglophone one, which at this point, my English wasn't great. My French was pretty good.
Right. So you were speaking French with all your friends and in nursery when you were in West Africa, and now suddenly you've arrived in Sudan as a 6-7-year-old and it's all English.
Yeah. So we moved to Sudan. We were in Umdurman.
Okay.
And then a gunfight happened on our street because this was the middle of the civil war. Huh? We moved to Khartoum. I started at Nile Valley Academy, which was where you went to if you didn't go to Rift Valley, if you were living in Sudan.
Okay. So are we talking about international schools here?
Yes. It was American run, but I think most of the students were rich Sudanese kids. Yeah, I was there until I was about 9. My parents came to the conclusion that although aid work is good and helpful, it wasn't what they came to the continent for. They came to the continent to work with Muslims and see Muslims become disciples of Christ, and neither of them were really doing that anymore. My dad wasn't really involved in the ministry of the church that we were part of because he was so busy either doing stuff in the office in Sudan or being in the south and helping out with stuff there.
Okay.
Which, again, good work, but it just wasn't what they had come to do. So we moved up to a city in the north of England to work with Muslims. And yeah, that is my childhood. Grew up there from 10 until 18.
Okay. How was the north of England growing up there? Were you in church? Did you have an active faith at that time?
My active faith really begun there. I don't think there was ever a point in which I didn't have some sort of faith. I have fairly vague memories of having a fairly powerful encounter with God when I was about 5. And that I can remember, and that stuck with me. And I just saw stuff growing up that made me think, okay, well, the unseen is definitely real and definitely has an effect. So I can't really deny that.
Yeah.
I came to the north of England as this 9-10-year-old. I was sort of confused. I was kind of angry at my parents for leaving, even though they did have good reasons for leaving. I mean, there was also a bunch of other stuff going on in Sudan at the time.
Yeah, but as a 10-year-old, all you're seeing is, I was happy there, and now why are we here? I don't get it.
Why have you dumped me in this?
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. That's quite an important part of being a third culture kid, isn't it?
Yeah, I began my journey to faith from there because I entered a very negative mindset about things, just about life in general as a 11-year-old. Then I remember being in church and I picked up Ecclesiastes because I kind of roughly went for the middle of the Bible because I thought, I'll just slap in the middle because I don't want to listen to the sermon. And it was Ecclesiastes, and me being quite edgy, read through the first part of it and thought, yeah, everything is pointless. And then kept reading and was super engaged with what was going on and said, okay, well, if everything physical wastes away and isn't something that you're supposed to build your trust on, but something that you enjoy and you use, the thing that you should put your trust on is eternal and non-physical. In the end, the only constant is God. So why on earth do you care about these things? Which seems like a really sort of basic line to go with. But it was the basis for me kind of thinking, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
That's interesting. Yeah, I bet not many people use Ecclesiastes as a good book for evangelism, but you've got to start somewhere, don't you, with, well, what else is there? Sometimes that's such an important question.
Yeah.
If there isn't a God, then what? Well, most people just blindly run through life and don't even ask those questions. You know, it's great that you're engaging with that as a 11, 12-year-old. Okay, so you go through school up north and, your folks are doing stuff with the church. And then how did it develop from there for you?
So I entered high school. That was really good. My school was a faith school. So you had to have a letter signed by a religious leader of some kind. It was roughly split between halfway Christians, halfway Muslims. A lot of the Christians were people who weren't Christians, but their parents went to a church for 3 months, got the vicar to sign off, and never went again.
Interesting.
And you could tell pretty quickly who those were.
Yeah.
But that was a really good environment to begin comparing conceptions of who God is, because you went off the Muslims and what they were saying, what they were learning from like dawah lessons in the mosque. They would all repeat the same thing. So it's like, okay, I know you've all been told to say this by your imam. But we also had Nigerian Christians. Our school was majority non-white by a long shot, which made the Christian Union in the sixth form very interesting because the backbone of our membership was Nigerian.
Awesome.
But we had some fairly high Anglicans who were also part of it.
Yeah.
And we had to try and figure out, okay, well, how do we make this a space where it's not just the Nigerians going on long, fiery rants?
Were they more Pentecostal in nature as well?
Oh, goodness me, yes.
Not wanting to stereotype too much, but...
No. I mean...
It's often the way, Nigerian background is a bit more charismatic Pentecostal than the traditional Anglican, for sure.
Yeah. And there's a lot of spaces needed for fiery, passionate rants.
Definitely.
Especially towards high Anglicans. But yeah, that was fun to organize. But a lot of it was being in school and balancing different ideas, being in church and within my family where the focus was always Jesus. One thing that I think really kept me anchored throughout high school was my family's focus was what's the most important thing here? And this played into everything, even embarrassingly, the way I talk to girls. Because I got challenged on, okay, great, you feel this thing, but how does Jesus play into this? Because if this girl hasn't got Jesus on her mind and hasn't got pleasing God on her mind, this is either going to cause you a lot of pain or just needs to be dropped. And that was unbelievably important for me. It gave me an anchor in like a lot of moral ambiguity that was quite trendy in high school.
That's really cool. Yeah, the role of family as an anchor and of course your walk with Jesus as your major anchor through so much transition. I mean, that's key, isn't it? And I think when you've had this kind of upbringing as a TCK, going from country to country, so much is moving and shifting. For some, they lean in on Jesus and they just say, yeah, this is right and this is truth and this is the one who can see me through it. And so their faith becomes very strong, like it sounds like it has been for you and for your siblings as well, actually. But then there are a lot of folks, who grow up on the mission field, kids, and they go the other way. It's like pastors' kids. There's no guarantee, is there,
Yeah, I often think that it has to do with over-familiarity with the gospel. You get to a point where you don't see the wonder in it anymore. Because to you, that's been your whole life, like, Jesus is savior from sort of the darkness in your heart. Say, okay, cool, I've heard that every day since I was 5. Yes. What does that even mean to me anymore?
Yeah.
And what helped us was the ritual of daily Bible studies when we were growing up. That was one of the few constants we had in our family. Even when we were on planes, when we were in airports, wherever we were, we did a Bible study every night. Even now, I'm 22. I go back home from uni, and that happens.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
And that was, again, super important.
Yeah, that's good, because then it's not just I'm leaning on the family's faith, but the scriptures ultimately. And so actually that's where the root of everything is. It's not just because mum and dad say so.
Yeah.
You can see where they're drawing their wisdom from and their hope from and their security from.
Yeah.
You're going to the source yourself.
It's something external to them.
Yeah. Okay, so perhaps then let's go forward until you're leaving school. What happened next? Did you go overseas and do anything in like a gap year, or did you explore university or something else? Apprenticeships?
I had a crisis looking at different options after sixth form, which to people who don't know is education from 16 to 18 to get qualifications to go to university. I considered a bunch of options, but every option I could think of was either interesting but pointless, useful but not interesting. Then I thought, okay, go for a gap year, see where things go. Signed up originally with World Horizons. That fell through. Then my dad said, hey, there's someone we know who's doing a cafe outreach program for refugees in Athens. So after your A-levels, you just passed, should we go on a celebration/work week holiday?
That's cool.
Obviously, absolutely up for that. Then we went across Greece, Kalamata, Athens, Thessaloniki. Went to a bunch of different offices, got to go into a refugee camp. One of the officers said, hey, look, if you're actually planning on being here for a few months, don't come here. But our sister organization is working out in the islands with the big refugee camps. And originally I thought, okay, cool, that's like a good thing to do for like 3 months, and then I'll do proper base work in Thessaloniki. But then I made my application. I signed up, got on a plane to Mytilene, which is the capital of Lesbos Island.
Okay.
To sign up with an organization called Eurorelief.
Okay, and what was their major focus and purpose of being there then?
Eurorelief originally was an organization set up by Greek evangelicals geared towards earthquake relief. So that was their focus.
Yeah.
And then the refugee crisis began, and people were crossing in their thousands across the Aegean from Turkey to Greece.
Okay, yeah.
And Lesbos was one of the biggest places they could get to because there is, I want to say, a 20-kilometer distance between the Turkish mainland and the northern tip of Lesbos.
Right, okay. And what year is this then that all this sort of kicked off, especially for Lesbos?
Oh, gosh.
Just to put you on the spot. But I mean, we're talking the last 5-6 years it's been so intense around there, or longer?
I'm tempted to say 2015 is when it really began with the first wave of Syrians.
Yeah.
But it's still going on now.
Right.
The demographics have changed over the years, but it's still going on. What ended up developing was it started off with these small camps because originally it was just they would set up stuff for you and then you would end up going through.
Onto somewhere else then?
Yeah.
Okay. Temporary refugee camps to sort of process people and then bring them into Europe.
Yeah. That changed fairly quickly because I think the EU realized, oh crud, this is not just going to be a few people. We're thinking hundreds of thousands of people are coming.
Yeah.
So they call them identification centers.
Mm-hmm.
They might be more commonly referred to as refugee camps.
Okay.
Which they were. One of these was Moria, which was at one point the biggest refugee camp in Europe. Eurorelief had gone from doing emergency aid, had moved into Moria, and then started running housing. So Eurorelief's main job, or one of its biggest jobs, was you've arrived, you get your papers somewhere else through an identification center which is outside of the camp.
Okay.
And then you would go to Eurorelief and they would give you a tent or they would sort out accommodation for you. And you would be out of the new arrival section.
Okay.
You would move into a new tent. They would mark where you were, how many of you there were. And that way, if they needed to give you news, tickets, whatever, they knew where to find you.
Okay.
That was Eurorelief's main job, and they were the biggest NGO in Moria by the time that I arrived.
Okay, so what year is this then when you arrived, and what did you see? Describe what you first saw there.
So September 2019, I was 19 years old. How do I describe it?
Are we just talking tent after tent after tent as far as you could see?
Far more chaotic than that.
Okay.
Because it wasn't just tents, it was these container boxes. They were meant to fit families that were a little bit more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
To put into numbers, at this point, Moria the center was originally built to hold 2,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I was there, it was roughly 12,000 people.
Wow.
And you had these small tents dotted all up roads. Like as long as you were walking within the camp, there were tents everywhere, and they weren't like these really set things. It would be like these 4-man tents you would get for camping, just set up all across the road. People would build these little makeshift shelters just to make extensions into their tents. Those were everywhere, but they were banned because they were seen as dangerous. It was just heaving with people from everywhere. You could hear the camp quite a while before you got anywhere near it. And it was just filled with like sort of smoke.
Yeah, people burning things, cooking.
Yeah.
Toilet blocks, I suppose, all in one particular area, and then there must have been quite challenging. Just the whole logistics of running a camp like that, trying to build a city out of nothing.
The sewage would regularly overrun.
Gosh. And so, I mean, you say volunteers. What was the job?
Well, it depended on the volunteer. If we view it as a bit of almost like a hierarchy, which is a term that I think some volunteers would be super happy about, but at the bottom level, short-termers, you would get moved into housing and you would essentially just do what you were told. Mm-hmm. And one of the main jobs was you take people's papers from this big desk, which was under this tin sort of roof. You would go into the office, give them, you would say how many of them there were. The people inside the office would then decide where they go, whatever. They would come back to you, tell them, get a tent for 4. You'd go into this back room, get them a tent. You would either spray a number there, or you would walk up with the family to their new spot and spray it on for them to mark them. And that was sort of what you were doing for maybe like 10, 11 families every day. That would be what one person would do, who's just a normal housing officer.
Lots of registration, logistics.
Oh, yes.
You're not really spending a lot of time talking with the refugees at that point, or do you get into conversations with those that can speak English?
You could. There was a bit of an odd sort of dimension to it, because on one hand, you want to talk to people, and people often ask you to come stop and eat with them. That used to happen quite a bit.
Okay.
But on the other hand, for me anyway, I would think, for every time I'm spending sitting with this family in a tent, there are like 5 more families who are up there who might have to sleep in new arrivals again because they weren't able to get one today. So urgency was mixed in quite a bit, especially in housing.
Yeah.
So you would start there. The housing could be very chaotic because you would often get stuck up somewhere in the middle of this. There was an olive grove that surrounded the camp, and that was where the most chaotic stuff happened. Mm-hmm. It's also where the majority of the camp lived, and people were just sort of building like structures and these little roads. There was no electricity up there, so at night it was super dangerous. Yeah, you would see fights over like resources. My first shift, I can remember this so clearly. I got given the task of settling a Yemeni family upon what was called one of the levels, which are these big, they were kind of like stairs, but they were huge.
Yep.
And people would settle up along them. I brought this family up, put them next to this tent, and then these Afghan guys came up to me and said, "There's no space here." It's like, yeah, there is space here. We've checked. You could just move this thing here, which were like, there were some crates. Then we can get them in. I went, oh, no, there's no space though. We're so full. It's like, yeah, I know, but we got to give this family a place to stay. The whole camp is full. I think the Yemenis then caught on to what was going on, started yelling at them in English. The Afghans were yelling back at them in English, yelling at me in English. Afghans would then yell at each other in Dari. The Yemenis would yell at each other in Arabic and then yell back at me in English. Man. I was kind of like slightly panicking. And then a fire broke out in the olive grove. And it was like a big one. Because September in the islands is still
so dry.
Still dry. Fire broke out. I heard on this little radio, like, oh, by the way, guys, just to let you know this is going on. It's like, yeah, I know. And then as I'm sorting this out, a plane skydives, dropping like all this fire extinguisher stuff. And this all happens within a space of about 15 minutes. It's my first shift.
No way.
And eventually the Afghans go, yeah, fine, they can stay here. And I walk back to the office, sort of like my eyes slightly wide and my hands slightly shaking, going, what on earth just happened?
Yeah.
There were shifts like that all the time. And some of them could be kind of dark. I remember getting stuck up in the Syrian section of the camp. Some woman screamed inside her tent. I thought, well, I can't just go, oh, well, and walk away. Went up to check what it was, and her husband had messaged her saying, when I come back tonight, I'm going to kill you.
Whoa.
And the Syrian guy who was translating didn't seem to think this was a big deal. He was like, yeah, he says this all the time. Well, I don't want to be around for the one time he actually means it. So I had to go back down, talk to somebody. The police so there were police inside the camp. They refused to go up into the jungle, the olive grove surrounding the camp where most of the camp lives. Yeah. They wouldn't go there.
All right. These are Greek police?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would have to bring her down. She was like sort of screaming, saying, no, they need to come here. My bosses were telling me, like, look, if she isn't willing to leave, just get on with your job. Thought, no, I really need to try and stick and see this through. Yeah, I managed to finally get her into like protected housing. But stuff like that, people fighting over like wood would happen regularly as a housing officer. I then got given an opportunity, because I was a young man, to work in the sections, which was a completely different ballgame from a housing officer, because the sections were where vulnerable people lived.
Okay.
So this would be unaccompanied minors and single women.
Wow.
Eurorelief was in sections B, C, D, and E of the camp. So they did almost all of the stuff with single women and one section worth of unaccompanied minor boys. And they asked me, go and work here and make this more of a sort of a permanent thing. You don't do housing anymore, but you do have to do food and sort of just make sure that they're not killing each other. Which I thought was a joke, but it really wasn't.
Wow. I mean, just to pause on that, because I'm thinking, I can't imagine the stories that these guys carrying with them, the experiences they've had. They might have come out of incredible trauma, incredible loss. They must be frightened. Like you say, many of them are vulnerable. They're on their own. They don't have their families. I can understand why the whole thing's like a tinderbox. Like you say, fires would spark off because there's sort of probably, open fires and dry ground and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But a tinderbox in the sense that relationally too, all these different cultures, vulnerable, traumatized people in one place. It's no surprise, is it, that fights would happen and so on.
It was also a disordered space. I think that was the main component. If there was a strong sense of order, then it would be different. How much different is another question.
But that's the point. Because so often in countries like we're used to, here in the West, with strong law and order and strong judicial systems, we think oh, well, we're nice people. That's why we don't go out fighting every weekend and this and that, because we're nice. No, it's not because you're nice. It's because there are good structures that have been in place and systems that work. But when that's ripped away, as in a post-war situation or a refugee situation, we suddenly are all vulnerable to that kind of anger and fear and aggression and all that sort of stuff. So I just think we have to be so careful, don't we, that we don't, judge people in that scenario. That's all I'm digging at, is that, gosh, what would I be feeling like if I was that vulnerable and that traumatized?
Yeah, and it made a lot more sense as to why people would often lash out, especially if they were living in the jungle where you would hear things at night. And you've got your wife, and you've got your children.
Yeah.
And you're constantly thinking, what am I prepared to do if something goes wrong? Because the police are not coming up to help me.
Right.
And people were jumpy because of that.
Exactly.
I guess the closest equivalent to it would be something like a prison environment, where people are watching their back a lot and are quite jumpy and distrustful, and they don't like the system because the system is confusing and isn't explaining things to them and doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah. Definitely. I'm trying to think, what on earth, could some of our listeners connect this to, where they've had no experience of prison, perhaps they've had no experience of anything like this. Think how, even at an airport, when suddenly all the flights are cancelled and you're getting no information, you're stuck in an airport. I'm sure some of our listeners have had this, and people just start getting angry and yelling at each other and yelling at the staff. What's going on? Why is my flight? And how long are we going to be here? There's all this uncertainty. You start to lose security and hope, and it brings out anger. So that magnified hugely in a place like a refugee camp or a prison, I think is what we're getting at. So, what else happened? So you move into the sections. Give us a couple of anecdotal stories of some of the people you were trying to support and help there, or some of the other challenges for them living there.
Imagine a sort of a rectangular space with big rooms, like going all the way down. Each room has around maybe like 20, 30 boys.
Oh, right.
Our office was on the upper end towards this big metal gate that would get shut every night. And about 180 boys lived in this section.
Wow, from many different cultures.
By this point, the camp was majority Afghan.
Okay.
By far. And the section I was living in was mostly Afghan, and especially Hazara Afghan.
Okay.
So Persian speaking. There was one room that they dumped. Any unaccompanied African minor would get dumped in one room, which was room 5. Yeah. Gosh, I remember that. My job every day was to do 3 meals a day.
Okay.
Well, 2. You did breakfast and lunch on one shift, dinner on another, and then your shift would end at midnight. And, gosh, where do I begin?
I mean, were you cooking these meals or just serving them?
No, the military would bring these big boxes. And then we would serve them out of a window, and we'd have to tick off boys' names on a list because there are 180 kids. We've got to remember who's got food.
And what would the boys do all day?
That would be the problem. Not much. And when you're not doing much, you are more likely to get sucked into stuff. They had school, but a lot of them didn't really want to go to that. The one big thing that was like a saving grace for them was Barcelona Football Club ran a program in Moria village where they trained them. And because of that, every single boy in the section, their football team was Barcelona. Yeah, maybe that's why Barcelona were doing it. That was what they would do. But the rest of the time, they were up in the jungle. They were out and about in the camp. Some of them were helping out with businesses. Others were trying to get organized. That was the more responsible ones. I met a 13-year-old Afghan boy who had all of his documents ready, which most of them didn't. So he didn't stay in the camp for super long.
And did you ever get stuck in the middle of fights and get...
Oh, regularly.
Yeah, did you get beaten a bit yourself sometimes?
Right, let me take this back. We had a speaker that we would give out under the condition that you gave us your ID card. And your ID card was used for getting in and out of the section, and without it, the police just wouldn't let you in.
Okay.
They took the speaker and then they locked the door of their room because they were bored. And then I think they had stolen some other stuff as well. And
the speakers, what are they using it for? To play music and
yeah,
dance or whatever?
But there was a point where it's like, I'm going off shift. I need to bring it back in. It was midnight, and they were kind of like, no, haha. I had to get another volunteer in, and we had to like go through the door. The entire room jumped us.
Whoa.
Which was okay because a lot of them were fairly young, so it was just kind of like getting snapped at the ankles. But yeah, we finally managed to get it out. I got a huge cut on my leg. The guy who was with me then got threatened with a knife. There was another time where we broke up a fight between these two rooms, and what the boys would commonly do is that they would take apart their beds and they would make weapons out of them.
Whoa.
The lower end was just kind of using the bars and sort of hitting people. The worst I ever saw was a spear. Oh, weirdly, a sling. People would make slings, and they were good slings. They could really hit people. This one time, it was a fight between these two rooms. They often did this, and just sort of smacking each other with these iron bars.
Nasty.
Yeah, after I left and I was back in the UK, that was something that flashed in my mind occasionally, was that scene, because there was sort of blood on the floor. There were like a couple of kids who were unconscious. I got hit in the ribs, but I didn't know at the time, because my thought was just stop the fight right now, because the police would take ages, even though they were literally just across the courtyard. They would take ages to get involved in stuff. Yeah, there was that. The worst incident we ever had to deal with was some guy's cousin got jumped in the jungle from the neighboring section. I can't quite remember how it happened, but it ended up leading to a massive fight between the section next door and ours. I wasn't on this shift. I was going to be on the one the next morning. They broke the gate down. They started just having a fight. Knives got pulled. A 14-year-old boy is killed about 2 meters outside of our office. And one of the boys who we were taking care of did it.
Oh, wow.
Multiple stab. Yeah, spent the morning talking to police. One memory I have really clearly is one of the boys asking for a bottle of water, giving it to him, and then him unscrewing the cap and sort of pouring it out over the blood that was there to clean it up. That was a very poignant image for me for a while. And after that, there weren't many fights, because someone had gotten killed.
Yeah.
And the guy who did it is now in a prison in Athens.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when you signed up for this, probably didn't know how intense some of these kind of experiences would be, or did you have any clue?
People said it would be hard. I didn't know what that meant, because if I'm honest, I was a pretty lazy student, so I didn't really know what hard meant. It wasn't until I got to a point where I was so unbelievably exhausted that I went to sleep from a shift, woke up the next day, and felt just as tired as when I went to bed. Yeah. And my prayers became sort of very short, frequent, desperate things of, please just give me strength to make it through this shift.
Sharing this podcast is a really good way to encourage more people to get involved with God's great mission, whether locally or globally. So please do help us get the word out there. If you use an iPhone, it's pretty easy to write us a review, and that has a big impact on how many people can find us. Alternatively, you could share one of your favourite episodes with your church family or home group or CU, either in person or on WhatsApp or social media. Thanks, guys, and now let's get back to the podcast.
I didn't make it easier for myself, because out of not knowing how to deal with both wanting to care for these boys who were often erratic, angry, scared, and out of that would then lash out, I didn't know how to deal with that, and also caring for them, because I don't trust them, but I want to love them.
Yeah.
But what on earth does the love thing mean anymore?
Yeah, how does that work?
It's just a phrase that we use. So I ended up being very harsh with the way I did things. I just wouldn't trust anyone, even guys who I should have given the benefit of the doubt.
How many months in is this we're talking?
This was a month and a half into the sections.
Yeah. You're probably facing kind of burnout.
Well, there were only 3 people working in the section. So we were doing like 3 shifts. We would do 2 shifts every day, but because of numbers, every shift was a solo one. And I was, exhausted. I was angry.
With the situation, with God, with the leaders of the camp or whoever.
Way
officials,
more
police.
petty than that.
Okay.
I was angry at the boys. They had stolen stuff of mine.
Yeah.
I mean, I was angry at the way things were working in the camp anyway, but that was less close to me. It was more that my own personal pride would get hurt. And I mean, the turning point for me from kind of going to like thinking of my job as a police officer rather than a caretaker was in the face of so much work, I took my rest days very seriously. We'd have 2 every week, but I took them super seriously. And I really started committing myself to scripture. And I went through Corinthians and got to one with Corinthians 13, the wedding chapter, apparently. And kind of read through that and thought, okay, love is patient, love is kind, it does not boast. You know, I could give all I have to the poor, but without love, it's nothing. That hurt me quite a lot because I kind of sat back and thought, great, you've hauled yourself across Europe. You've given more than thousands of euros now a year, and you don't care because caring hurts now. And it's easier to not care and just go by the function than it is to actually care about these kids.
Yeah, of course, you start guarding your own heart because you're getting wounded in the middle of all this too. You start putting up the defenses. You start getting into coping. I mean, I think you're telling the story of a lot of carers, doctors. You know, how can you remain compassionate in a caring profession when you're overwhelmed, exhausted? Yeah, so that's a very real thing I think you're describing that others will probably resonate with.
It took a while for me to properly understand that. Like, what I set myself to was learning all of their names. Every boy in the section, I would learn their names. Because that way I didn't have to rely on this little tick list and people bringing their cards. Because boys often lost their cards, but I would be harsh and say, no, you bring your card, you're lying to me, yada yada. And thought, actually, learn their names. Know who they are, and you'll know that they've come to food. And spend time in their rooms, talk to them, hang out with them. Actually, when they invite you in for meals, sit there and just allow the time to pass. Don't rush off to something unless you have to.
That's good.
I left for Christmas and came back to the UK. Very weird experience for the first week being in the UK. But I met one of my friends from high school who's a Persian speaker. And I was sort of just talking about this, and they'd be like, oh yeah, they would say these swear words, and she'd be like, oh, haha, that's bad. And then at one point I said, oh yeah, well, I remember a few of these kids would like call me Dadashi. She went, Dadashi? Like, yeah, they would like say it all the time. She went, oh no, that's super cute. That means like brother. I had assumed it was a swear word for like the entire time I was there, and they would say Dadashi, and I went, oh yeah, okay, whatever. That really hurt. I wasn't originally planning on going back, but then I thought, like, I actually don't really have anywhere else to go, and I could stay here, but I feel like there's a lot more I need to learn by being there. So I made the commitment to come back.
For how long?
Well, originally it was going to be 3 months, but what ended up happening was I went for 3 months. It was just about the beginning of March. I got promoted. So I was in charge of the other volunteers and setting up shifts, which, yeah, it was quite fun responsibility. Then riots began on the island around this time.
Okay.
And they began because the Greek government at the time had run off getting votes from the islands by saying, we will not build any more camps. We will start trying to get refugees out onto the mainland. Which is what the refugees wanted, and it's definitely what people from Lesbos wanted. Because they thought, look, they don't want to be there. They don't want to be here. We don't want them here. Just let them go. And then a boat came in with more supplies to build another camp.
Oh, wow.
Well, so the rumor was. But whether or not they actually were wasn't important because there were riots across the whole island. The Greek government said they weren't budging, and the more extreme sides of the protests couldn't attack the refugees because, what, you got to go up to a camp of 17,000 people.
Wow.
March 2020, 17,000. A camp built for 2,000. It's heaving. It's unbelievable. It has its own economy. People run these little restaurants and barbershops. You could buy banana smoothies inside the camp. I did half of my grocery shopping inside Moria because it was closer than going all the way home and buying stuff. So they started attacking NGO workers.
Wow.
Because we lived in the villages around the camp. 3 of my friends were in a van driving from a village to the capital city where a roadblock was there by a mob who pulled them out of the van upon realizing that they were NGO workers, stole the keys from the van so they couldn't move. One of them said that randomly out of nowhere, a Greek man sort of came forward and grabbed the keys, put them in her hand and told her to go. So they went.
Trying to protect them then?
Yeah.
From the mob.
From the mob. One journalist got almost thrown into the sea, but these guys trying to throw him in was stopped by this very ferocious Greek grandma. They had set up roadblocks around the whole camp. Not anywhere near the camp itself, but around the roads leading into it. So I was on morning shift, which was from 8 until 4. I collapsed twice during work because I was sick and exhausted. Then we got news, the night shift can't come in.
Because of the roadblocks by mobs, yeah.
And the police were too busy dealing with even bigger riots in the capital, so they weren't going to bother with the roadblocks.
Okay.
So people couldn't get in. They were telling NGO workers, stay inside your house, close your windows, and don't do anything. If you need food, talk to us, because there are Greek people who work for Eurorelief who will basically get the food for you.
Okay.
But don't go outside. So we did the night shift as well. We got to about 10 at night where they told us, look, the roadblocks are still there. We can't get out. We're going to have to sleep inside the offices tonight. Keep your radios next to your head and we'll tell you the minute that the roadblocks clear up or we can find a road.
Wow.
Which was an odd connecting moment, interestingly, with refugees. Because we set up carpets on this office door, we took off our shoes. We were living in a container box that was quite similar to some of the places where the refugees were living in. We were eating chicken and rice that we'd bought inside the camp that somebody had made. And this Afghan guy walks past and sees us and goes, my friend, you are a refugee! to us. And we're like, oh yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Tough night's sleep. 4 a.m, radio chatter, guys, roads up, get your shoes on, we're going now. Get there, can't go back into work for about a week. Which was a blessing.
Yeah, because you could decompress.
Yeah. Then they said, we think violence is going to escalate over the weekend. We're evacuating you to Athens.
Wow.
Again, that was kind of a nice little getaway. Around this time, a funky virus was beginning to kick around Athens. Yeah.
Okay, we're in 2020 now. Okay.
So people are beginning to talk about this thing. And at this point, I'm like, okay, cool, I guess that's whatever. We go back. Crazy story. The boys took care of themselves for almost a week by stealing the keys. Because the food still arrived on time.
Yeah.
The military was still delivering food because the mobs weren't going to stop the military.
Yeah. So they just worked out their own distribution system.
Well,
basically.
From what I gathered from the boys at first, it was like chaos. Because there was all these guys just running in and sort of getting the food that they normally liked and then just leaving the boiled eggs in these huge cans and not wanting to touch them. But then these 2 boys especially, they found the keys. One of them opened up the laundry room and started doing laundry for all the boys. And the other one got a small crew of guys together and basically went into our office where we normally did the food and just started handing it out. Our relationship with those guys was very different when we came back from evacuation.
They suddenly valued you a bit more? Or they just had experienced the work you were doing?
Well, with the whole section, they were a lot friendlier towards us because they realized what we were doing sort of every day. And also because a lot of them were like young kids. So
yeah,
it was like, oh, the older brothers are back. And around this time, about 2 weeks later, we were told Greece is going into lockdown. The last plane is leaving 3 days' time. The last boat is leaving in about 4. You have to decide right now whether you're going to commit for another who knows how long or you're going home. I called my parents because, again, I'm like 19. I have no clue what I'm doing.
Exactly.
And they were like, well, think about it like this. You could either stay on a beautiful island while summer's beginning, leave the house because you're an essential worker, have a purpose for every day, and like have your own space. Or come back here and have none of those.
Be trapped in a house in the middle of the rain up north in England.
Yeah, and thought, okay, this seems like a fairly easy choice then. My church gave me some extra money just to pay for rent.
Okay.
For the next few months. But I did not know how long I was going to be there for.
Yeah.
So when I slapped that down saying I'll stay, I was clueless as to how long I would be there for. We were still dealing with a very crowded, overpopulated camp. Fights got bigger and nastier. There was one riot involving around 300 people.
Gee.
And I mean, at this point, it kind of became a routine of radio chatter saying, okay, riot's beginning up here. If it's not near me, it's not my problem yet. It's when it grows and they tell me to leave that I have to care. But everything had fallen into a routine of how you deal with things. If there is like a big fight brewing, what do? You stay calm. You don't get overexcited, because if you get overexcited, then everyone else is looking at you, think something really bad is happening. Remember people's names. Be friendly always. Explain to people why you're doing the things that you're doing, because then even if they don't like it, they're not going to be super frustrated with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we fell into that pattern. Eurorelief is a Christian organization, but we were completely banned from evangelizing. But
yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, for all sorts of reasons, probably funding and just vulnerable people and yeah. Did you get many chances to just talk about faith generally, even if you weren't sort of evangelizing as such, or was it just sort of not really talked about? It's all practical.
I was involved in a church that was mostly made up of Mennonites and Afghans, because there were Mennonites who were working for Eurorelief, but they had two sections of their organization. One was working directly in the camp and the other was doing ministry. If you're working in the camp, you couldn't really do ministry.
Yeah.
The ministry section was big, and they would set up these Bible studies all the time. There was a YWAM boat called the Next Wave, I believe. Really good guys. They essentially gave the space over so people could have a space outside of the camp, because even being in the camp was just such headache.
Yeah.
People would go on these long walks, long away from the camp. I lived in a village that was about a 15-20 minute drive away from the camp. I went down to the beach one day and there was just a Cameroonian guy just sitting there. And I talked to him and just went, yeah, I just needed a walk. It's so tiring. I just want to stay here.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
yeah, so the YWAM guys just provided a space outside the camp where people could go, and if they wanted to do Bible studies as well, they could do that.
Yeah.
With them.
They had Bible studies also for volunteers. Or Eurorelief volunteers as well. We used to go to these Wednesday Bible studies, and it was really refreshing, actually. The opportunities that I got were, I was not allowed to start conversations. If someone asked me a question, I could answer that question directly. But it was more, answer the question, end it. If they ask another question, say it, answer it, end it. That would be how it would go. And I got an odd amount of chances to explain the gospel, because we got a lot more when the boys in this section realized we weren't getting paid. That was a big thing.
I bet.
Because that spread quickly. Some guys thought we were lying.
Okay. Yep.
Which would be an odd thing to lie. I don't know. But a lot of them were just sort of confused. Why on earth are you here if you're not getting paid?
Exactly.
This is awful. Why would you do this?
Yeah.
And it became a really good opportunity to say, Jesus, through whom God is revealed, told us to go and love radically. And if God is really the Lord of my life, then I can't ignore his command. And I can't ignore his command even if I'm not feeling like it. Even if people insult me, even if they don't
appreciate it.
Yeah, then that's not important.
It's obedience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really.
And that struck a lot of guys.
I bet.
There were Congolese guys in one of the rooms, and they would hold Bible studies there in French. That was always encouraging to see.
In the camps, then, amongst themselves.
Oh gosh, in the rest of the camp, there were like these Congolese churches inside these rooms, and you could hear them sometimes.
Wow.
If you ever took the Sunday shift, it was so refreshing. I sometimes took walks outside of the section.
Just to hear the worship.
Just to hear them sing.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have instruments, but they prayed passionately as well. It was,
that's cool.
Gosh, to have faith like that. So I was set to finish in like late June, and I had to go back because my debit card was also going out of date. So I kind of really needed to go home. But I also was just done.
Mm-hmm.
I'd put in over 9 months.
That's very intense.
With there was Christmas, but I hadn't had a break since I'd gotten back. So I was just done. And then a few days before I officially left Eurorelief, one of my bosses came up to me and said, "Hey, how long are you on the island for before, you go?" I went, "Oh yeah, I'm here for like 3 days after leaving, like after I officially stopped working."
Yeah.
Why? She went, "Could you take a bag for us and just stay at this cafe filled with New Testaments?"
Wow.
I had coffee with a guy who was studying also in the UK, and then out of nowhere, this dude just walked up, just went, "This it?" Yeah, picked up the bag, walked away. And that was kind of the closest I got to.
So who was he?
He was, I think, Gambian, but I didn't talk to him. He just walked up. I think
Was he taking them into the camps?
Yeah, he was walking back to the camp.
Okay, that's it.
It was this big bag filled with French New Testaments.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Missionary work is so much bigger than just the stuff, the smuggling the Bibles or speaking to someone about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, you were there with a purpose to love these guys, and your motivation was to serve Jesus, and he called you to go do that. So for me, that is as much part of it. Now, I'm not saying that means we can do missionary work without any kind of speaking or proclaiming. Absolutely not. The gospel must be proclaimed to be understood for people to be saved.
I think when I often think about missionary work, I think proclaiming the word. But I mean, even now I think about it, even in Lesbos, I was challenged on that, where we kind of had something similar to a chaplain. And they would often do debriefings, and they would also do the prayer at the beginning of the morning shift. And this one guy, an American Mennonite pastor, said, for a lot of these guys, this is the first time they are meeting Christians. You cannot say anything, but you must do all that you can to proclaim the gospel in what you do, because they will remember you.
That's good. That's powerful. Yeah. I mean, transformational, biblical, holistic mission includes all these things. Loving people, justice issues, various things that we do. And like I say, you can't take the word out of that. It's got to be in there somewhere. It involves a lot more than just the words we use. So, yeah, no, that's a powerful expression of who God is to those people that you were ministering to for so long.
Yeah. They, being Eurorelief staff, were very clear on be the hands and feet of Jesus. If you can't be the mouth, be the hands and feet.
And who knows, the countries that many of these guys will end up in, there may be another step on that journey where they get to actually find a Bible or
absolutely,
or chat with one of the Congolese in the refugee camp, and they might be sharing with them verbally. You couldn't do.
There were guys who came to do like a talk at our church who were Afghan, who were studying at a Bible college in Germany, and they had been through that camp.
Wow, that's cool.
And they had come back to Lesbos to speak. And there were quite a strong contingent of the congregation were Afghan. And they were speaking to them as well. And they had such powerful, difficult messages, because it was one of your family, your friends, and your culture is going to reject you for holding to this. Are you prepared to lose what you have to gain everything?
Yeah, that's often what it means for Muslims. All right. Gosh, this is good. It's really helping me understand some of the situations there in Lesbos for refugees and what you've been through yourself personally. So just to sort of wrap up, what are you up to nowadays? What are you doing? And any thoughts as to what the future might look like for you?
I am currently a third-year Bible student at London School of Theology, which has been a great opportunity to really dig into some of the questions. Also, really good space to really think through stuff that happened in Greece. All of my friends joke that it's become the when I was on my gap year story, which I swore I would never do. And now I'm on a podcast talking about it. So there we are. Yeah, that's what I'm doing currently. I'm going to take another year out after this to work in ministry, get a part-time job, sort of re-sow disciplines of getting up and doing the difficult, boring things every day that I've definitely lost while being a student.
Yeah,
I'm considering going back to work with Eurorelief. And to anyone who's listening, Eurorelief really, really needs people. They're still on Lesbos. They're now on Samos as well. They are right on the front line of the Turkish-Syrian earthquake relief. There's a real need, especially for men on the islands, to lead shifts and to do jobs that just women aren't really able to do because of culture and danger.
Okay.
But
yeah, we'll be sure to put in the podcast notes some of these links to this organization.
Yeah, Eurorelief, go sign up. They're hands and feet of Jesus in places where a lot of people don't want to go.
Brilliant. And beyond that, who knows what the Lord has for you? Because he'll weave these experiences into what he's doing in you and through you. And yeah, we'll watch this space and see what he has for you in the future.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, scriptures, Bible characters that sustained you, just gave you encouragement in some of the dark times out there?
The thing that really gave me encouragement was the daily disciplines of prayer and rest. And one of the great things about Eurorelief was that I was surrounded by people who prayed and who kept me mentally in the space of, this work often sucks, but you did not come here because it was easy. You came here because you cared. And that care, I definitely believe, shouldn't just be there. It should be here as well. Refugees are in the UK, in the US, they're in Europe. They often find it very difficult here too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're stuck in hotels often, aren't they, around London or Heathrow and places. Yeah. They get moved on from place to place at a moment's notice, drop of a hat.
Yeah.
And it's desperately sad. And yes, the government's put huge resources and time and effort and promotion to help out Ukrainians and the Hong Kong Chinese as well coming. But I'm glad you've been talking about Afghans today, because there are still many, many Afghans here who haven't had just those kind of experiences, and they're still stuck and they're still waiting for housing.
I've been unbelievably privileged, and I believe and know, due to God's providence, that I wandered into a church around LST that is on the front line with working with Afghans.
All right. That's recently, or when you started at London School of Theology?
This is still now. And I was very blessed to do that. And one of the reasons why that's so incredible is because they didn't used to be able to enter those spaces. The government didn't like churches entering those spaces. But now they're kind of desperate for anyone to really do anything. And so often churches are the ones who are at the front line. And there's biblical precedent here.
Yeah.
Welcome the foreigner among you.
Absolutely.
Treat him as one of your own, because you were foreigners once.
Exactly.
We're exiles here just as much. And as long as we keep sort of really ingraining into ourselves, we're British, American, Swiss, German Christians, we are going to find it difficult to work with refugees. If we primarily are of the mindset of, we are followers of Christ living in exile in a world that does not follow him, and we stick to that, welcoming the foreigner among us is such a big thing.
100%.
It's such a key thing. And churches are almost being offered that space to fill in, to be the primary welcomers of foreigners. And we need to be more active in that.
Yeah, I agree.
There's such an unbelievable opportunity for people, the first people who they meet in this country, who welcome them into their homes, whose children play with their kids. Who talk to them, who help them out with paperwork, who do all these things, even if it's not direct ministry, even if it's not an opportunity to say, Christ is Lord.
You're still just being a friend. These guys need friends. They need help in all sorts of ways, don't they?
It's a kingdom attitude.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's something that we would do for one another. And, the church in the UK, it needs to be a community that people look at and admire. That they're not just stepping into an idea, they are stepping into a community that is centered around the sovereignty of Christ.
Yeah. And practical loving of the poor.
Absolutely. That has to play out into everything else. Because if we don't, then of course we're going to struggle because our attitude isn't in the right place. We're going to struggle with loving people who don't appreciate what you do. And often, a lot of refugees aren't angels, and you have to love even when people are acting selfishly. It's sort of easy to love people who are very grateful, and there are many refugees who are very grateful. But you also have to be in that love when they're not. You have to welcome people who don't want to accept where your love comes from. Final thoughts. If Jesus really is at the center of your life and kingdom values are in everything that you do, the church should be entering that space for refugees. We should be there for them. Not just in what we can tell them, because that's a trap. of ministry with refugees is the end goal is saying this thing, and then they're a part of it, and then that's kind of it. But be a community that people admire and want to enter. We care for refugees because that is what we do as people with kingdom values, not because we're hoping to get to the end goal of telling them this thing.
Amen. Yeah, that's so good. And that really picks up from my last guest, actually, and he was, saying exactly the same about his life in Uganda. And, we've got to care for the poor because that's God's heart. That's the bottom line. And
absolutely,
if they come to know Jesus and see God and understand salvation through that and enter into it through that, then amazing. But our job is to walk the kingdom walk, and God will do what he will with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
in word and deed.
Yeah. Trust God with your time and with your attitudes. And he will do, and I am a witness to this. He has done and will do incredible things with what you give him. Imagine what he can do with your time, with your mindset, with your perspectives. You give those over to God and he can turn them into incredible things.
Brilliant. What a great place to end. Ben, thank you so much for encouraging us along those lines, sharing those stories. Yeah, I'll definitely put something about Welcome Churches in the show notes, a wonderful organization that are encouraging churches, helping churches to do exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, but I'm really challenged. I'm really inspired. So really good to have you here today, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this.
Yeah. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for being with us today, guys. I want to encourage you now to take a minute just to ask God what role you can play in his mission. Maybe he's calling you to give generously. Or maybe to pray for an unreached people group and bring that to the attention of your church. Maybe to have a conversation with your leaders about running a Momentum Yes course. And maybe you want to offer yourselves to Jesus right now, to say to him that you're willing to go wherever he calls you, whatever the cost. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Do get in touch with me, matt@frontiers.org.uk. You might have questions about something raised in the episode. You might want to invite me to come speak at your church. You might have ideas for the podcast. Otherwise, do check us out on our website, frontiers.org.uk, and on all social media platforms @FrontiersUK.